This is The Witch of Wookey Hole, written by Barrel Coops.
Part folk horror, part contemporary fable, this is a moody, rain-lit tale about memory, rivers, and rewriting the plaque beneath a myth, so the next hand that reaches out touches truth, not a warning.
The Witch of Wookey Hole.
For centuries she had been stone, cold, silent, watching, drip, drip, drip. The cave breathed dampness, its air heavy with echoes, children's laughter, the drone of tour guides repeating her tale, a bitter old woman, a curse, a holy man who turned her to rock. But magic does not die. It waits. The first crack came with the storm. Thunder rolled, shaking the limestone bones of the world, as floodwaters poured into Wookey Hole with a fury not seen in centuries. Fissures split, stones shuddered, and the prison that had held her began to crumble. And then she breathed. Her first inhale in an age stank of wet earth and lost time. Joints stiff with centuries of silence creaked as she straightened. Fingers that had once clawed at empty air now flexed free. She was awake. Stepping from the cave's shadows, she entered a world she did not know. The air hummed with strange lights. Metal chariots screamed along smooth black rivers, and the humans, so many humans, carried glowing talismans they stroked and whispered to with reverence. No one noticed her, at first. Then a child, eyes wide and mouth hanging open, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mum?" The statue moved. The woman barely looked up. "Don't be silly, love." The Witch of Wookey Hole smiled, her lips cracking like parched clay. She had been wronged, betrayed, stolen from. The world had forgotten her. She would make them remember. After the drip rain still ran from her hair when she stepped onto the smooth black river that did not move. It shone like night made solid, split by pale lines that hummed with meaning she couldn't read. The storm had torn her from stone. The storm still pressed at her back, urging. She took another step. Water slapped in her shoes, and the lights above, tame lightning in glass, shivered and blinked as if wary of her. People flowed around her, a stream of bodies with their attention pinned to small glowing talismans. They stroked these lights with reverent thumbs, whispered into them as if the objects were tiny shrines that answered back. The metal chariots roared, their eyes white and unblinking, and they stayed miraculously within lanes painted upon the river's surface. She reached for one, curiosity first, power second, but it hissed past and threw wind and grit in her face. Its breath stank of dragon, hot and oiled. No one noticed her, at first. A little hand tugged a larger one. "Mum," the statue moved. The mother barely lifted her eyes from her talisman. "Don't be silly, love." The witch smiled, and the movement cracked the new clay of her lips. The world had forgotten her and written a quieter, cruder version of her name on placards and postcards. She'd seen them inside the cave, behind glass and glare, her face flattened into souvenir. She had been wronged once in a way that calcified. Now she was wronged again in 1,000 paper cuts. "Remember me," she thought, and the nearest lamp hissed and dimmed. The child saw that. She felt the flicker of the girl's attention catch and hold, but the mother tugged her away toward the chariots and the river-still road that led to other, larger rivers. From the cliff mouth behind, a voice crackled. "Copy that! Visual on the..." It came from a man in a bright yellow vest who stood half under the cave awning. He held a little black box to his mouth and spoke to the air. The box answered in a stranger's voice. The witch watched, intrigued and suspicious, the way one watches a dog that might bite. A priest of glass voices, she decided, a broker of disembodied things. He saw her then. His expression ran through doubt, complaint, and the first twinge of fear. "You can't be in the car park, love." "Costume or not, you're going to get hit." "Costume." The word smudged past her. She tilted her head. "You speak for the box?" Her voice emerged rough from so much time unused, grainy with sediment. "What?" The man glanced at the rain-black river. "Look, just off the road, yeah?" He reached out a hand as if to herd her, polite and firm. She did not like being herded. The air changed. Even after centuries in stone, her senses could still feel weather like a second spine. Something small and insect-fast buzzed above the man's head, a wasp made of iron and glass, its single eye unblinking. It darted toward her face, curious and bold, humming with a trapped storm's heart. She lifted her palm. The little machine feathered side to side, seeking a better view. She smelt the heat in it and heard the whine climb. "Drone," someone said behind her. The word meant nothing, but the disrespect did. She slapped. The iron wasp smacked the tarmac, spun, and choked itself silent. The man yelped and hopped back. "Hey! You can't!" He bent as if to rescue it. She stepped between his hand and the broken wasp and gave him a look she had not needed for a very, very long time. He froze, not with holy force, but with the oldest, simplest kind of fear, the kind that comes when a story stands up and breathes in front of you. From the slope above, more people raised their glowing talismans. They held them out at arm's length, like charms meant to ward off wolves. Her own face, reflected in 100 small mirrors, stared back at her, hair wild, eyes carrying cave dark, cheeks smeared with the soft white of limestone. For a heartbeat, it felt like the monk again, his calm, his pity, the way he had cradled a vial and the river had obeyed him more than it obeyed her. A hard ache rose in her throat. She swallowed it, and the taste was iron. Rain softened. The chariots pushed on, indifferent, and the tame lightning flickered once, twice, before returning to its steady mechanical glow. The man in the bright vest found his voice. "Police are on their way," he said into the box. His eyes said, "I don't know what you are, but I want you contained." Contained. She had spent centuries contained, not again. She turned from the car park river and the staring mirrors and let the old pool guide her. Water. Always it had been water. The axe ran from the cave's throat, slipped under bridges and hedges, and threaded the night like a wet seam. Even over the new smells, hot rubber, fried sugar, the faint perfume blown out by a passing chariot, she could find the river's cold breath. She crossed the painted stripes where the metal beasts hushed themselves and allowed humans to pass. A sigil, she thought, a negotiated truce. The child, still watching from the curb, lifted small fingers in a wave. The witch inclined her head in answer, the barest bow, and felt something in her chest loosen a fraction. Children had always seen her most clearly. They had not yet learned to file the world into boxes too small to hold it. Beyond the floodlights, hedgerows knitted the dark together. She slid into that green seam, and the night took her weight. The man shouted something she didn't need to hear. A door banged. A chariot braked with a squeal, and somewhere a bell tolled, faint, precise, insistently modern and ancient at once. It woke a memory of stone lace and candle smoke, and voices raised not against her, but towards something they loved. Monks. A city of them once. The long, low hum of prayer across wet fields, the cathedral's ribs lifting the sky. Wells. She could feel it through the weather, as if distance itself were damp and conducting. She followed the river. It answered her heel with soft mud and glances of starlight where the clouds thinned. Every few steps she tasted the air and found the flavour of herself. A rumour travelling faster than feet, already threaded into those glowing talismans, already retold. Let them talk, she thought, and smiled without cracking this time. They would remember her. But before that, she would learn the names of these new shrines and rivers and wasps, and she would learn what held power here and what merely pretended to. She would not be contained, not by stone, not by story. The axe curved left toward the low glow of the city. She went with it, rain at her back, the cave at her shoulder, and the night opening like a door. The river stitched the fields together with a cold needle, and she followed its thread until hedgerow gave way to houses. The storm had walked on. What it left behind hung from gutters and leaf tips, 1,000 small offerings to gravity. Ahead, a wider black river split the night, a tarmac current piping metal chariots toward and away from a low-lit city. Painted white stripes crossed the road. People waited at the edge until a small bronze box clicked and the green spirit man burned to life. At his blessing, the chariots gentled and the humans stepped onto the river without drowning. A clever sigil, she thought, a truce with rules everyone obeyed, even the iron beasts. She pressed a round button because everyone else did. The box woke and spoke in beeps. Not a monk's bell, not a bird's call, something manufactured to imitate permission. When the spirit man gave his glow, she walked with the others. The chariots bowed by breaking, and she bowed back because manners outlived centuries. People carried their glowing talismans like portable hearths. Some mouthed into them. Their voices swallowed and returned in thinner echoes. One woman brushed her stone and it answered in a cheerful, sexless voice that remembered shopping lists and weather predictions. The witch leaned, listening. It was a clever servant, This disembodied house spirit they kept leashed in glass. She felt a prickle of professional interest, the way an old craftswoman eyes a novel tool and wonders which part of it is handwork and which is trick. A lamp-post stood at the corner like a tame lightning rod. She wanted to know what obeyed in this age and what merely pretended to. She lifted 2 fingers. "Dim," she said, a word pitched not to the metal itself, but to the patient current trapped within. The lamp shivered like a horse-smelling wolf and went dark. A murmur moved through the little crowd, faces tilted up. Several talismans turned their eyes toward the sudden pocket of night. Then the darkness travelled, lamp to lamp, a polite kneeling wave. Please and thank you and be still. The corner softened, and in that dim the stars showed themselves like forgotten pins. A man in a hood swore, bloody power cut. His talisman brightened to compensate and showed her a picture of herself, a rain-scoured woman, white-limed, eyes full of cave. The image dissolved. The glass returned to icons and numbers. He hadn't meant to show her. He didn't even look up. A long-bellied chariot groaned to a stop. Its doors gasped open, kneeling to the curb. People filed aboard and tapped small cards against a glowing disc that chirped when appeased. Tribute at a gate. Passage in exchange for a kiss of lightning. The witch stepped closer, and the driver caught her eye through his little window. He wore a yellow vest like the cave-keeper, but his mouth held neither welcome nor command, only the tired wariness of a ferryman seeing a shape the river does not usually ferry. "Wrote to Wells?" she asked. The language came more easily with each breath, the centuries crackling off her mouth like frost. He blinked. "You all right, love?" "I am awake," she said, which was both true and unhelpful. He gestured vaguely. "Pay or move on." She watched a woman tap her card again, heard the gate spirits chirp, smelt the breath of warmth inside the chariot, and tried to decide whether obedience to a disc counted as obedience to a god. Before the decision could settle, a smaller chariot slid up, sleek, glass-sided, with a child pressed against the window. The same child, the one who had seen her first. The girl's hand lifted, small and solemn. The witch did not wave. She placed her palm flat to the bus's skin as it sighed and drew away, and the girl mirrored her from inside, hand to hand for a breath that fogged both sides. Then the bus took the child downstream. Sirens unwound somewhere behind, red and blue spitting across windows like anxious fish, and she felt the hunt in them. Not for her alone. These were generic wolves that ran whenever an order was given, but she had learned to hear the shape of attention when it tilted. It tilted now. She moved. Automatic doors hissed open before she touched them, as if bowing. The shop beyond was a small palace of lights and coils, a cold box that made winter, a cabinet that held a heart painted on its face, as if the people here stored spare lives in walls for when one failed. She paused at the heart box. Behind its glass a device waited, yellow and patient. Ad read the letters. A diminutive saint? A new oath? She lifted a finger toward the seal and felt from within the box a faint prickle, stored thunder, leashed and eager. Useful, dangerous. She left it shut. A man in a logoed shirt said, "Can I help you?" in a tone that meant, "Please don't make me help you." "I'm learning the names for everything," she said, and meant it. He smiled in the way people do when they think you are not dangerous but are also not quite sane. She stepped back outside into the softer dark she had made. Overhead, little glass barnacles stared, the watchful eyes fixed to every corner, blinking red. She felt the tickle of being seen and could not tell whether the seeing belonged to a person or a hive of them. She tugged her shawl closer and the cloth released the trapped smell of cave. Lime and river damp and old smoke long eaten by stone. It steadied her. The bells began then. Clean notes poured into the wet air, measured and exact. Not the wavering chant of old monks, but their descendant, brighter, clock-true, hung from a tower that raised its ribbed back against the night. The sound travelled the way water does, curving around corners, finding her. Wells. Memory rose. A nave like a forest of stone, candlelight soft as breath, a man who had looked at her as one looks at a wound and a wonder at once. She tasted nettles and ash and old vows. "No," she told the memory, and the bell answered with the next quarter as if to mark the word. Sirens thickened. Somewhere a woman laughed into her talisman, and a world away another woman's laughter answered a heartbeat late. The witch turned her face to the bells and let them lead. The road widened to a roundabout, a ritual circle painted on the earth for machines to dance in. In its centre, a small, tended garden. She crossed to it, set her feet to grass, and felt the hum of buried cables and old roots arguing. The roots were losing. She put her palm to the soil and whispered, a tone too low for the human ear. A street light at the circle's lip flickered, considered obedience, and brightened out of pure stubbornness. She laughed, brief, surprised, and the laugh made a passing boy glance up from his talisman and blink as if waking. The bells called again. She left the circle and walked toward them. Between houses she glimpsed it at last, the cathedral's face, pale and intricate, rising like frostwork from the earth. It pulled at her as surely as the river did. Behind her the sirens braided into a single wail. Ahead the bells tolled the hour. She went to meet the newer of her old enemies. Not a man this time, perhaps, but whatever had taken up his work. The bells drew her as a tide draws weed. Close now, the cathedral lifted out of the dark, stone lace buttresses like folded wings, saints weathered to soft ovals. Rain was a veil on its face. Every drop made the old skin shine. She set a bare hand to a pillar and felt the patient cold of it, the slow animal of stone sleeping and waking across centuries. Inside, the air smelled of dusted wood and polish and the quiet that prayers leave behind. The great volume swallowed the storm. Her wet footsteps clicked and faded along the nave. She moved with care. Not out of reverence. Reverence had been poisoned for her once, but from the instinct you learn in caves. Respect the ceiling, count the echoes, let your body remember scale. Raking light licked one wall. An oblique strip tossed from a torch held low. Where it struck, shallow lines flared out of smoothness. Circles crossed with petals, tangled nets of double V's, little wheel of 5 petals cut blunt by a nervous hand. She knew them in her bones. Boys had scratched them by the cave mouth with knives borrowed and denied. Fathers had cut them on lintels, charms to tangle what frightened them, names for a shapeless dread. Apotropaic marks, said a voice from the gloom. Protection graffiti. 16th century, mostly. The witch did not startle. The word rolled through her, Greek to Latin to English, like a ghost remembering a different language for the same fear. She let her palm leave the pillar. Wet stone kept her print for a heartbeat, then healed. The torch lifted and found a woman's face. Late 20s, perhaps. Rain curls pinned and already escaping, a notebook tucked under one arm, a small cross at her throat. More habit than threat, the witch decided. The beam slid away from the witch's eyes, practiced and edged the cuts again. We think they made them in quick passes with a pocket knife, the woman said, half to herself, as if resuming a conversation started alone. You can see where they rushed, see the stutter, as if the fear that prompted the mark also hurried the hand. She was not afraid. Not properly. Her voice held excitement like a coal holds red. The witch considered that. You name the nets, the witch said. Even. Curious. The woman blinked, recalibrated, smiled in a professional way that meant I'm used to questions from the public, but also I wasn't expecting you. Yes. I'm Elen. She lowered the light further so it warmed the flagstones and did not stab. Dr. Elen Barnard. The name struck like grit in the eye. Barnard. A monk had carried a name like that into the cave, a sentry that smelled of wool and smoke in his cloak. He had looked at her the way a surgeon looks at a splinter he must cut from a child. Pity first, steel after. His water had hissed against her skin like winter. Elen said gently, Are you part of the Wookey event? The living legend thing they're planning? Your incredible makeup, if so. Her gaze flicked lightly over the witch's cheeks, where lime had crusted pale and rain furrows broke it into riverbeds. The witch did not answer the question, because to do so would be to pick up a thread she did not mean to weave. You teach these marks their names, she said instead, so they cannot pretend to be accidents. Ellen's smile reached her eyes now a little. Something like that. Her phone buzzed, she ignored it. It buzzed again and she glanced. The screen lit her jaw and hand. A caption scrolled, blurry frame, cave mouth, a dark shape moving. Statue at Wookey Hole. She thumbed the sound off and looked back up. Look, it's late and the vergers will lock up soon. You're soaked through. She lifted the torch toward the crossing and the side door beyond. My place is 5 minutes. You can warm up. Warmth. Fire held in a box. A kettle that hummed without flame. The witch remembered none of those things and all of them. She also remembered rope and pity sharpened into tools. "You carry a monk's name," she said. Ellen made a small, surprised sound that might have been a laugh. "Family legend says there was a Father Barnard at Glastonbury before the dissolutions. I think the story has been polished so many times it reflects the teller more than the truth." She tapped the notebook. "Stone is less obliging. It keeps what it keeps. Will you?" The witch stepped toward the font. It sat heavy as a wellhead, carved leaves worn to soft tongues under 1,000 hands. New water swam in it, faintly chlorined, clear as scraped glass. Once, the mere sight of a rim like that would have pulled the breath from her. Now the prickle was distant, a quiver under the skin, like a remembered pain. She hovered a finger above the surface. The water stilled under her shadow, as if listening. "They told a story that suited their tools," she said, almost to the bowl. "They drew nets on the cave and said they had caught me. They poured a river in their god's name and said it had turned me to stone. It was tidier that way." Ellen's torch trembled, just once, not from fear but from the weight of choosing what to say next. "Stories tidy us," she said, "and ruin us. Both." She found the witch's eyes. "If someone wrote a tidier version of you, I'm sorry. The marks don't choose who they're for. The people do." The witch looked again at the carved wheel with its petals, a child's geometry pressed into a cathedral's flank. She remembered a boy's hand bitten nails knife grip too tight. She remembered laughing at him then. She did not laugh now. Sirens twisted past the far side of the close, skidding their colours over the wet glass of the big west window. The sound warped inside the nave, made a creature of itself and then faded. The verger's keys chinked somewhere near the choir, locking up. Ellen held the side door with her shoulder and gestured. Rain hissed outside. "Come on. Tea, dry clothes, and if that name made a face for you, we can talk about it or not. Trust is a trick you relearn like walking after stone." It felt ungainly. She weighed the cold in her bones against the old bruises a monk's kindness could leave. Warmth, and nearer to the city's new heart. The talking windows, the hive of glass eyes, the place where stories were minted now. She nodded once. "I will listen." Good. Ellen's relief was quiet. She took nothing of the witch's arm, did not heard. Watch the step. They went out together into the washed dark, the bells marking them like milestones, and the cathedral exhaled behind them, closing its ribs as the keys turned. Ellen's flat smelled of books and damp coats, and something warm that had only just remembered it was bread. The door shut, and the world's weather stayed politely in the hall. Inside, everything hummed, a low chorus of useful servants. A white cabinet breathed a small winter into itself. A square window on a stand muttered advertising to no one. A round black puck on the shelf glowed as if waiting to be named. The witch stood very still, letting the room announce its powers. In caves, you listen first. "Shoes by the radiator," Ellen said, instinctively gentle, as if speaking around a skittish animal. "Towels there, kettle on." The kettle was a tin bird that sang without fire. It clicked and began to whisper. The witch thought of cauldrons and of boys blistering their hands feeding kindling, and felt, strangely, envy for this age that had tamed heat into a domestic creature. Ellen busied her hands. Cardigan off a chair back, pressed into the witch's palms, a mug with a chipped lip, steam from a bag of leaves, a plate as if ceremony required bread. The flat kept offering its small magics. On the desk, papers lay ranked in tidy stacks, photographs of carved marks, catalogues of scratches, an open laptop with its lit, lidless eye, and, uncannily, a little glass vial half full of clear water, stoppered like something that might leak story if not corked. The witch felt it tug at the corner of her attention and deliberately looked away. "Sit," Elen said, "or stand, or pace, whatever's kindest to your bones." Kindness. The witch placed her shawl on the radiator and watched the cloth sag as warmth climbed into it, lifting the smell of cave, lime, damp, a char that had been memory for centuries. She sipped the tea. It tasted like hedgerow and rain and metal. She could have loved it, in a life where loving did not often end as a blade. Ellen's phone burred on the counter, jittering against wood. She turned it over with a thumb. A message unfurled, a small river of text and a trembling video frame. A girl's profile, rain-speckled window, the cave mouth shaky beyond. Underneath a name, Maya. A child's certainty in her punctuation. "Dr. Barnard, I found your email on the cathedral website. The statue moved. I filmed it. Please don't think I'm lying. Ellen's mouth made a quiet "oh." She sent this to the admin inbox. She said half to the witch and half to herself. I have an alert for, never mind. May I? The witch inclined her head as if granting audience to a messenger. Ellen tapped. The video took the room. The talking window, the television, woke to mirror the phone, and the cave spilled out of its rectangle. The floodlights, the tourists huddled like roosting gulls, the slow, impossible exhale of a figure moving from stone to woman. The camera shivered with the child's breath. When the witch lifted her hand to slap the iron wasp from the air, the room's air seemed to flinch with it. A breath later the scene shrank, boxed by words. Is this Britain's spookiest hoax? A presenter's laugh, bright as cutlery, chimed over the clip. Someone's really leaning into the legend, he said to a woman with lacquered hair, already smiling at the cue card that had the line she planned to think. A line of comments ran past along the bottom like rats, witty and insistent. LOL, that make-up marketing stunt, witch core is so last year, my nan says Father Barnard would turn in his grave, Barnard. The name was a blade laid flat against her skin. Elen fumbled the remote, thumb heavy. I can turn. Sorry, I didn't. Do not apologize for a window that repeats what it is told, the witch said, but her voice had gone pebble-hard. She set her mug down so gently the porcelain did not dare clink. In the split second between breath and word, she tasted the old pattern, the curling of power toward a command, the air gathering its skirts. Be still, she said to the screen. The picture tore like wet paper and went out. The puck on the shelf dimmed as if startled. Somewhere in the walls the humming bees missed a beat and caught themselves. Ellen stared at the suddenly black glass. Her mouth made another "oh" less quiet. She did not cross herself. She did not run. She put the remote down with both hands as if accepting a verdict. Right, she said, a librarian at a riot. That's quite something. The witch waited for the rebuke. Holy water in a cupboard? A quick, bright prayer? Ellen only steadied the mug in the witch's hand as one would steady a ladder while someone else climbed. They're wrong, Ellen said, and the simple present tense of it filled the room like light. About you, I mean. The tidy version. They're wrong. Lava moved slowly in the witch's chest, then cooled. They will not be wrong for long, she said. It might have been threat. It might have been promise. Ellen took a breath that seemed to rearrange a day into a different shape. If you let me record you, your words, your version, I can put that on the record. Archives. Museums. Not the breakfast shows. She laughed, small and derisive at the word shows. I can't make them kind, but I can make them less careless. Records are nets, the witch said. Nets with ink. She walked to the desk where the photographs lay. Fingers ghosting over glossy paper, she followed the scored wheel of a daisy over and over until its petals blurred. But even nets can be woven to catch the right fish. The phone burred again. Ellen glanced. She's written back. The girl, Maya. She says her mum doesn't believe her. She wants to know if she can bring me to the cave tomorrow to show me where it... She stopped herself from saying you. Where it happened. The witch looked at the black window and saw, reflected faint, her cave-smeared face and Elen's in the same pane, neither overlaying the other. The cave is a mouth, she said. People put words in it. It is time some of those were mine. Outside, tires hissed in the wet. Somewhere a neighbour laughed. The radiator clicked as air worked its way through little iron veins. The shawl had warmed. When the witch lifted it, steam uncurled like breath from a sleeping animal. She wrapped herself and felt her own weight return to her. Less stone, more woman. Ellen poured more tea for the sake of her hands. There's a spare room, she said, and a lock on the door if locks are the language you need. I need listening, the witch said, and the names of your useful spirits so I can know which ones lie. Ellen nodded, businesslike. Fridge, television, router, kettle, boiler, thermostat, smoke alarm, charge. She pointed like a teacher, and the witch, absurdly, felt the old desire to pass a test. And that, Ellen added with a little smile toward the black puck, is a voice assistant. Don't worry. We can keep it quiet. The witch glanced at the dimmed puck, at the glass vial glinting on the desk, at the heap of photographs that were really footprints in wet stone. She touched the edge of the desk with 2 fingers, the lightest of vows. In the morning, she said, we begin with the cave. And tonight? Tonight, the witch said, I learn the names of your bees. Night braided itself neatly around the flat. The bees in the walls settled into a steady drone. Elen showed her the latch, the light pull cords, the spare room with its slanted ceiling, and a stack of blankets that smelled faintly of lavender and library. After a final, practical tour, boiler here, bathroom there, shout if you need anything, Ellen's door clicked, soft as a comma. The witch stood in the small square of kitchen and listened. Old houses talk if you let them. Tick of hot pipes thinking about cooling, rain combing the windows, a neighbour's television murmuring it had fixed the world again. She repeated the names Elen had taught her under her breath, fridge, kettle, router, as if learning the true words for small gods would make them honest. On the desk, the glass vial caught a thread of streetlight and returned it, patient as a star. It had a paper label, scrawled in a neat, hurried hand. Axe, Wookey, Siphon 3, 0208. Clear water, meniscus tender as an eyelid. The witch felt the tug of it the way iron feels the earth's pull, faint and inexorable. She had said she would wait until morning. She stepped closer anyway. The first time a monk had lifted a lip of water toward her, he had done it with pity knotted to duty so tightly you could not see daylight between the threads. His name had been something like Barnard. She had disliked the exactness of his hands more than his prayers. The river had obeyed him because authority is a habit. Water learns quickly. Riverbeds tell it where to go the way stories tell people where to be afraid. When it touched her skin, the cold had climbed into bone and tightened like rope. She had laughed at him then, because fear was a door you could only pass by. Telling it your name mattered more. She eased out the stopper with her nail. The little pop was domestic, almost silly. She tipped the vial and let a single drop grow fat at the rim until it slipped and bloomed on her fingertip. The skin prickled. Memory, not flame. She waited. No hiss, no frost radiating out like a bruise. Only the faintest cool, the temperature of a cave in summer. She dared her hand closer to her mouth and almost ceremoniously laid the drop on her tongue. It tasted of limestone and leaf rot and the metal of pipes, the modern aftertaste of a world that had taught even rivers to run in straight lines. Under that, the old flavour, wet wool, raw slate, a note like a struck bell. Tears came without her permission. She swallowed them before they could become part of the rite. Sanctity, she realised, thins when it is not fed. It does not vanish. It becomes what the world is willing to bear. No god had moved his hand out of the river. Time had. Time, and the tilting of a people's attention toward other altars, screens, schedules, precision. The drop cooled what it touched in her, not absolution, not erasure. A softening, as if the tightest knot had agreed to loosen one cautious turn. The chair by the desk made the smallest sound as she sat. She turned over the photographs with careful fingers. A boy's scratch became a flower. A woman's double V became a woven fence. Marks made by fear and hope in the same breath. She had mocked those nets once. She could see now they were a way to say, I am small, and the world is not, but still I will draw a line. Her own first line had been a promise made under a willow when a man with ink-stained fingers had smiled like a secret. He had kissed the heel of her hand where the skin is thinnest and told her he would return before the harvest. He had returned with his mother's eyes and the village at his back and the certainty of men who need the world to have one story. The monk had been summoned because one story had to eat another. The rest became limestone theatre. She found herself speaking to the darkness before she knew she had invited it close. I wanted love, she said, and the kettle clicked once in the cupboard as if gossiping to the pipes. I would have settled for not being made into a warning. On the counter lay a cheap museum leaflet. The photo showed the stalagmite they still called her. The caption was kindness executed with a blunt blade. Local legend, the witch of Wookey Hole. Folklore tells of a fearful sorceress turned to stone by a holy monk to save a village from her curse. Beneath it, a smiling cartoon crone winked over a cauldron. A child's puzzle asked the reader to find 6 hidden bats. Her fingers heated without heat. She placed the leaflet flat, pressed 2 fingertips into the laminate and lifted them again. Crescent moons browned into the smear of a burn. She looked up, found the bare corner of worktop and wrote slowly, the letters sinking to a tan the colour of baked bread. Remember me. Not elegant. Legible. A request pitched at the exact height between plea and command. The black window across the room was still dead by her word. In its dark, she caught both of their shapes again, her wild outline, Ellen's second-hand cardigan on her shoulders, and through the hallway the faint slant of light under Ellen's door. Trust, she thought, is a bridge you don't test by jumping. Leaving would look like betrayal. Staying would feel like a cage. There was a third thing, the kind caves teach. Go back to the mouth and start again with better light. She took a pair of boots from the rack, mud dried in their tread, a woman's size that pinched a little, and set the latch as Elen had shown her so the door would not slam. The corridor smelled of wet wool and someone's dinner. On the stairs, a censer woken by her shadow brightened and then dimmed as she passed. The building let her go with gentle disinterest. Outside, the rain had gentled to a mist that lifted the city's smells. Yeast from the bakery's back door, the chalk of fresh mortar somewhere, the electric breath of the substation that hid behind a hedge and pretended to be a shed. The bells were quiet now. The river was not. She could feel its long muscle under the pavements, tugging her the way blood tugs a wound. She walked. On the way out of the close, a poster sagged on a notice board, rain making constellations on its ink. Legends live. Weekend at Wookey Hole, immersive experience. Book now. An image showed a witch rendered safe. Green skin, theatrical teeth, cute cat. The date was close. The confidence of it stung and steadied her in the same breath. Let them prepare their stage. She would choose her own lighting. She did not hurry. Power likes to imagine it arrives in a gallop. Real change keeps the river's pace, constant, persuasive, willing stone to move a grain at a time. When the hedges gathered and the road narrowed, she cut through a gap and tasted the damp on the air that meant fields again. The boots found mud, and mud remembered her weight. At the edge, where grass becomes gravel, she stopped. She looked back once, not for doubt but for measure. A square of lit windows set in a grid of dark, a life with books and a kettle, and a woman whose name carried old iron and new mercy. The flat held steady against the night like a lantern left on a step. Morning, she said to that square, not an apology but a promise, and let the dark take her toward the cave's mouth. By the time she reached the gorge, dawn was only a rumour behind the clouds. The cave mouth wore floodlights like a crown, too bright, too eager, and vans idled with their rear doors yawning, vinyl banners sagged damply. Legends live. High-vis jackets moved like bright fish. A man with a headset paced, muttering inventory as if names were spells. Fog machine, battery pack, safety cones, Barnard robe, hazard tape. She drew the glamour of ordinary around herself the way one shrugs into a borrowed coat. It was not invisibility, it was suggestion. Not worth stopping. Eyes skated off her and returned to clipboards and schedules. She drifted with the incoming tide, crew, influencers, hobbyists listening. Ring halos flared to life, white circles that made faces into moons. Tripods sprouted. A woman in velvet chalked a careful circle on the gravel and set tea lights around it, whispering to a handleless jar of salt. Two teenagers rehearsed a bit to camera. Smash that like for cursed content. And their laughter broke and reknit as they checked if anyone important had heard. At the ticket desk, a tour guide shuffled laminated scripts. His finger paused on a photo of the stalagmite they called her. "We hit the beats," he told a colleague. "Curse, monk, holy water. Keep it family-friendly. If the power trips, we call it atmospheric. Risk assessment says no open flames beyond the second chamber." He smiled at his own caution, and the smile slid away when the lights above him flickered in a ripple like muscle under skin. She went in. The cave took the day's noises and ate their edges. The electric hum from cables stapled to rock sounded like hornets trapped in amber. Drips marked distances. The river axe ran beside the walkway, low from the storm's thirst and then suddenly loud where the tunnel necked, its breath alternately warm and knife-bright as draughts found their roots. "Rolling in 5, someone whispered behind. Barnard walked through first, then we cut to the witch reveal at the kitchen. She knew those chambers by their adopted names. Parlour, kitchen. Picnicking words pressed onto geology as if caves were houses. The air grew colder in the way that says, we are going deeper now. And the crowd thinned to those who had work to do, or those who would not be warned off by their own blood. A drone, sleeker than the iron wasp she had slapped earlier, lifted, its eye blinking red. She let it pass close, let it drink her outline and the ache of her face, and then exhaled. Not a word, only breath shaped by intention. The little creature's lights ticked from green to orange to a dull, apologetic black. It wobbled and sat down gently on a handrail, as if it had remembered being rock. Phones failed next, not all at once. Failure moved through them like a thought someone was trying not to think. Screens softened, then darkened, then came back weak, with their time wrong, as if time itself found the cave an unreliable host. A ring halo chirped, whined, and dulled to a sallow coin. Atmospheric, the tour guide declared gamely, and his breath made ghosts in front of his mouth. The witch placed her palm against the wall, where the rock hung in thin draperies like wet curtains. "Wake," she said, very low. Not to the electricity. To the stone, the old animal that sleeps in miles and wakes in inches. Condensation thickened on the flowstone until its lip shone and dripped. The axe's voice dropped half a note. In the witch's kitchen, the air shifted, and you could feel, if you had spent your life in houses, that this wasn't a house at all. It was the inside of something that remembered oceans. She stepped off the walkway where a gap allowed the old path to skirt the river. Boots found the hollows where other feet had been told not to go. The hiss of a radio chased across a chamber, words stuttering and then dissolving. Someone swore softly. Someone else said, delighted, "Did you get that on B-cam?" In the kitchen, a new line lay like a seam. Chalk drawn firm across the floor, where the rock pinched, and a low passage invited crawl-belly curiosity. It wasn't the usual hazard stripe. It had the confidence of a boundary made by someone who understood that chalk is more than dust. Two overlapping V's nested along it at careful intervals, a hedge of little thorns. Ellen's hand, she thought, with the quick certitude that comes when the world offers you a shape you've already learned by touch. The marks were neat, not neatnik. The pressure had been even, like a person whose steadiness is trained. She stood over the line and tasted it the way you taste a storm, metal at the root of your teeth, nettle along the tongue, not holy. Attentive. The difference matters. Open, she told the chalk, out of habit more than hatred. It didn't. It brightened, only a little, a breath of pallor, and then settled again into its work of saying no further. She laughed, though the sound snagged on old pain. "You stubborn, thoughtful girl," she said into the stone. She could almost see Elen kneeling here with a head torch, sleeves pushed, chalk between finger and thumb, making a line whose purpose was not to bind a monster, but to keep a story from being trampled by feet and lighting rigs. Behind her, the staged Barnard, robe too clean, expression solemn as a brochure, stepped into view with his handlers. He carried a brass sprinkler bristling with drops. The crew had not yet noticed that the sprinkling would be only theatre. The cave had already swallowed the radio cue that should have sent a fog machine coughing. "Father Barnard approaches the witch's lair," the presenter breathed, voice portable and excited. "Will the legend awaken?" She turned her head just enough to look at him. A boy in a man's job, burdened with other people's certainty. His holy water would be from a tap. He would be kind if paid to be. The cave tightened its cold around them. The axe lifted a little, as if a hand had passed upstream and given the river a gentle push. Metal creaked in the walkways. A single tea light in the velvet woman's circle sighed itself out and left a sweet ribbon of smoke that rose and refused to bend. The presenter's talisman died mid-sentence. He stared at it, the way one stares at a guidebook that has just eaten a page. "Atmospheric," the tour guide repeated, but softly now, for himself. The witch set her heel to the chalk and did not cross. She pressed into the stone beside it and felt the cave answer, not with obedience, not with refusal, but with recognition, like an animal opening one eye to a familiar voice. It remembered her weight, the years she had been a statue at its lip, the legend layered like soot on rock. It also remembered Elen's care, her chalk hedge, the way she measured breath in drips and kept notes the way moss keeps rain. Both, the cave said, in the only language caves have, temperature, pressure, the arrangement of echoes. "I can keep you both." "Then keep us," she whispered back, "but do not keep me as warning alone." Far behind at the entrance, police tape fluttered in a draft it could not account for. A constable rubbed his forearms and made a joke about ghosts and budget cuts. Visitors shuffled, charmed and uneasy. In the kitchen, the ring lights stayed dead. and the old marks on the walls woke by sheen alone, their scratched petals briefly bright as if remembering the hands that made them. She stepped away from Ellen's line and let the glamour fall for a heartbeat. The boy dressed as Barnard saw her properly then and did not know whether to bow or to run. He half did both and made a shape like prayer out of it. "Not yet," she told him very gently. "Save your water." And to the cave she said, "I'm not finished." The first child to come back was the one who would not blink. She slipped past the fluttering tape the way water finds a crack, small shoulders set, plimsolls blacked with cave spray. The ring lights had already failed. Torches threw narrow suns that made more shadow than light. In that chiaroscuro, the girl became a stitch dropped by the grown-up's attention. She stopped at the lip of the witch's kitchen, where Elen's careful chalk hedge crossed the floor, and lifted something in both hands. A shawl. The witch's shawl, cave-scented, snagged earlier on an iron stake by the river path, and it seemed gathered by this stubborn pilgrim. "You dropped this," the girl said, not loud, not whispering, just true. Her eyes were steady, brave in the ordinary way that counts. The witch took the cloth and the smell of limestone unrolled into the cold air. "You came back," she said. "They said it was actors with makeup." The girl's mouth tilted, but the lights went out when you looked at them. "What do they call you?" the witch asked. "Maya, a good name. It held making inside it." "Maya," the witch said, tasting it. "I am called many things I did not choose." "What do you choose?" Maya asked, as if this were the most natural question in the world. A long time ago, the right to answer that had been taken like a cloak pulled off in public. Now, with the chalk line cool under her heel and the river breathing beside them, the witch let the lost thing come back. She leaned in so only the girl would hear and set the name in the air like a small flame. "Avis," she said. The breath of it tasted of nettles and smoke. "I was Avis before they made me a warning." Maya didn't flinch. She nodded once, solemn as a pact. "Hello, Avis." No recoil, no little cross of warding. Children do not fear names until they are taught to. Behind them, the cave admitted more noise. Radios fizzing bees in boxes, a presenter rediscovering his outside voice now that the camera was blind. "Police to the kitchen entrance," someone called. "We've got a miner in there." The phrase miner fell with the weight of liability and went skittering. Torches combed the dark. One beam found Maya and burned along her shoulders like a command. "Stand very still," Avis said, already drawing the night up as one draws a shawl. Shadow listens easily in caves. It is native, quick to obey soft authority. She cupped her hands and the surrounding dark flowed into them, a fold, a curtain, a hollow. Avis tucked Maya into that pocket the way a mother seals a child against rain with her coat. "Match the drip," she said, and the girl, quick to learn, breathed with the slow rhythm of water falling somewhere you cannot see. A woman in a yellow vest, no velvet, no halo, just practical boots and a braid that had been made before the storm, reached the chalk line and stopped short, as if she could feel its work with her shin bones. Her torch washed over the seam and dulled as if embarrassed. She lifted a loudhailer, a conch of iron. "All right in there?" she called, voice steady and local. Somerset ran under it like a brook. Avis let her own glamour slip enough to be seen. Gasps skittered and nested along the handrails. The Barnard actor took half a step back, sprinkler drooping like a flower that had remembered it was only brass. "We are all right," Avis said. She did not speak into the woman's machine. She spoke to the cave, and the cave lifted her voice and set it down where it was wanted. "The child is safe. Your toys are tired. Do not anger them further." Maya's pocket of shadow thinned just enough for her to watch, eyes wide but calm. She did not try to run across the chalk nor under it. She waited. Good, Avis thought. Waiting is another kind of courage. The woman with the braid lowered the loudhailer a hand's breadth. "I'm Sergeant Ellis," she said, adjusting not only volume but manners. "We've medical out front and parents. I need the girl." "I need the truth of my name," Avis said. "I need the river unpoisoned by theatre. I need the one who drew this hedge to come and speak without interruption." "Dr. Barnard?" Ellis asked, surprising herself with the quickness of the inference. "She's been assisting with—" The sergeant's radio snapped 2 clipped syllables into her ear. She winced, thumbed it lower. "She isn't on site. We can call her." "Call her," Avis said. The water at her hip tightened and loosened like a cat deciding whether to leap. "And call off your lightning circles and your wasps." She flicked her gaze at a second drone, its red eye making a slow velvety blink. It landed obediently on a metal bracket and pretended to be furniture. Nothing with captured thunder crosses this line. The presenter tried to reclaim the narrative. "You're on record?" He offered into a dead microphone, smile glassy, soul already calculating uploads that would never finish. "Could we just say your name for the viewers?" "Later," Avisi said, and made a small gesture shaped like closing a book, his mouth shut on instinct. The crew looked at him as if he had failed a test, and then looked back at her as if they had just realized the test had been the wrong one. Ellis studied the chalk. She touched the double V, not quite crossing it, and the mark warmed under her finger like a breath striking a hand in winter. She did not recoil either. "All right," she said. "No equipment beyond this line. No more theatrics. We clear the chamber, we wait for Dr. Barnard, and—" She tipped her chin toward the dark where Maya hid. "We get the little one to her ma'am." "On my word," Avis said. The phrase felt strange on her tongue and then fit, but not as property, as guest. Ellis nodded. "As guest," she repeated. She stepped back and spoke quietly to the nearest constable, and his whole posture changed from perimeter to usher. Avis recognized professional competence when she saw it. She had been it once, in a different century, under different vows. Avis opened her hands. The shadow let Maya go as softly as it had taken her. The girl centered herself without wobbling and lifted her chin. "Thank you," she told the dark as if it were a person. Then to Avis, "I told you they didn't tell the whole story." "You were right." Avisi settled the shawl around her shoulders and felt the room notice that ordinary gesture the way rooms do when they are deciding whether to be kind. "Go with Sergeant Ellis. Tell your mother that the cave has good manners, even when people do not." Maya's mouth quirked. "Will I see you again?" "On storm nights," Avis said, "and in records that catch the right fish." Maya nodded like someone filing away a rule that will one day save a life. Ellis offered her hand, and Maya took it without hesitation. They moved back through the hum of equipment dying into sulk and the murmur of men and women learning a new way to stand. The chalk glowed a shade, then dimmed, content with the bargain. When the girl was out of sight, the cave released a breath Avis had not known it was holding. The axe lifted a little, a whisper of muscle against stone. Somewhere upstream, culverts remembered their old mouths and tasted silt. "Bring Barnard," Avisi said, not to Ellis alone, but to the listening hive of the place. Phones asleep, cameras blind, humans wakeful. "Bring the one who draws lines that mean care." And then she stood, a heel on either side of history, and waited for the bell of the next thing to strike. Outside the cave, the world had arranged itself into zones and voices. Blue tape bit the air, vans squared their shoulders like polite oxen. A table of clipboards grew a spine and called itself command. Loudhailers made language louder, not clearer. When Sergeant Ellis said hold the line held. Avis stood with one heel on either side of Elen's chalk, the axe breathing at her calf. The cave's electric hornets had tired. The only light now came from working torches and the meek glow of safety signs. Radios crackled to themselves like crickets. A negotiator's voice arrived through the stone, amplified and careful. "Hello in there. My name is Rob Lane. I'm here to make sure everyone stays safe. We don't want anyone hurt." Avis let the cave carry her answer back without needing the iron conch. Safety begins with telling a story true. "Okay," the voice said, annotating the words with a pencil somewhere. "We can talk about that. But first, can you step toward my officer so we can see you and confirm the child is out?" "The child is out," Avis said. "The lie is not." A mutter rolled over the entrance crowd. Parents, hobbyists, the curious, the concerned, then broke into fragments as phones tried and failed to bloom. The night's earlier rain had gone somewhere and was doing sums. Avis set her palm to the rock face and went looking for the old culverts, the forgotten throats bricked and boxed, the drains with long memories, the chalky seams that learned once to carry flood and had not quite forgotten. She did not command. She reminded. Water likes remembering better than obeying. Upstream something coughed awake. The axe lifted, hesitated, lifted again as if testing new joints. In the car park, puddles found each other and became a sheet. The sheet found the camber of the tarmac and began to move. People stepped back with the little surprise sound crowds make when they are corrected by physics. A banner came loose on one corner, "Legends live," and slapped the river that was not a river and now was again. "Jesus," someone breathed. "Flash flood, not flash." A deliberate yoking together of what was already in the air and ground. The black river of road accepted water the way a story accepts a better ending, first grudging, then with relief. A metal chariot nosed lightened and lifted an inch on the swell. Sergeant Ellis swore softly, assessing. "Get the barriers up 2 levels, clear the lower car park. You help the elderly, that's a slip hazard. No, leave the kit. People first." Ellis's voice organised space like scaffolding. It left Aves free to do the messier work of untying a knot in the weather. The axe ran higher, not wild, but insistent. In a far corner of the grounds, an old stone mouth that had been convinced to be a flower bed all these years spat leaf mould and remembered being useful. A silt-brown rope of water arrowed into the car park and braided with the rest. In the swell's brand-new edge, a small shout rose, sharp, bright, the sound a mother's body knows before her mind does. Avis felt it as a tug in the sternum. She saw the shape at once. Maya, pulled by the hand toward dry steps, slipping at the margin where road forgot it was road. The girl's plimsoll lost grip. Momentum chose her. Avis did not think in words. She gathered the weather in both hands and said the simplest thing to it. Wait. The front of the surge obeyed. It stopped as a curve of glass stops. One clean arc, bubbles caught like silver seeds, a leaf pinned mid-flutter. The banner, "Legends Live," frozen with its exclamation point, skewed. A cigarette butt hung in suspension like a grub in amber. A toy dropped from a buggy, stared with one eye through a transparent fist. Maya's trainer found purchase again. She tottered, arms windmilling, and Sergeant Ellis was already there, one hand in the girl's armpit, the other on the startled mother's sleeve. "Got you. Up you get. Watch your step. It'll come down in a second. You don't want to meet." Her voice made the panic lie down. A murmur went through the watching ring. Even the ones who had come to be fed were quiet now. You cannot clap for a held wave. Ellis looked toward the cave mouth, toward the dark where Avis was and was not. She lifted her chin. No loudhailer this time. "Thank you," she said, not loudly, but like a post-driven true. Another voice reached them, raw with having run. "Avis?" Elen, drenched to the waist, a coat flung over pyjamas, a head torch strangling her hairline. She carried no chalk this time, no showman's brass, only breath and the bite of cold. She waded through shin water without theatre and stopped short of the chalk line as if she had been born knowing boundaries. She took in the held wave, the chalk hedge, the crew still and unbelieving, the banner arrested mid-boast. She met Avis's eyes across the chambers dim. "I'm sorry," Elen said, and the words were not a performance. They were tools. For the lazy telling, for letting the tidy version stand because it was easy to teach, for letting the nets be only for you and not for fear. Avis's hands were still in the air, wrists turning minutely as if balancing a tray no one else could see. "Sanctity has thinned," she said. "You knew it. I tasted it. Your river does not burn." "Then the work is ours," Elen said. "Not to chain you, but to choose better." She gestured at the flood and the banner and the people ankle-deep in their own forgetting. "Let me put it right. With you. Choice, not chains." The negotiator at the tape cleared his throat, remembered he was supposed to speak, and had the sense to say nothing. Cameras, even if they'd been awake, would have had trouble filming this, a thing that happened between held breath and true apology. Avis listened. Not for the content. She knew contrition could be mimed, but for the grain of it. Elen's apology had weight and direction. It lodged where the old knot sat and loosened it a fraction. "Very well," Avis said. "We do it together. But know this." She looked past Elen to the vans, the props, the tidy bullet points on the laminated script. "The river is not a backdrop. The cave is not a stage. The story does not belong to the mouth that speaks loudest. It belongs to the ones who were asked to live inside it," Elen said, finishing a thought she had been writing for years and had not known how to end until now. Avis smiled. The brief, bare sort that shows trust is a muscle you can still flex after centuries of stone. Then begin. She turned her hands. The wave lowered. Not all at once. inch by careful inch, so that people learned to breathe with it, so that the ankle of a child did not go under, so a mother could step down without slipping, and a ferryman in a bus could feel the water set him gently back onto a road that remembered being dry. The banner's exclamation mark sagged and became a question. When the car park was water with sense rather than a tantrum, the culverts took their share. The drains learned their old prayers again. The axe settled, not tame, not punished, attended. Torches found themselves reliable, radios unpanicked. The ring crowd loosened like a knot, remembering it was string. Ellis let out a breath she might count against her life later. Ellen pushed wet hair from her eyes. The negotiator said, very softly, "Right." Avis stood in the cave mouth between chalk and river, between old name and chosen one, and looked at Elen. "Bring your records," she said, "not as nets, as vessels. Bring me a place to put the truth where children can touch it and not be burned." "I will," Ellen said. "I promise." "Promises," Avis said, tasting the word as if testing a tool's balance, "are better than chains when they are kept." Outside, a small hand lifted from a mother's grasp and waved toward the dark. Maya's palm was a bright square against the wet morning. Avis raised 2 fingers in answer, and the day moved forward, altered by the simple fact of a wave that had paused to listen. For a long breath after the water gentled, the world held still in the shape she had asked for. Sound came back one thread at a time. The hiss of tires retreating, a child's relieved hiccup, a creak as the metal walkway remembered how to bear weight. Then the glowing talismans woke as if from a faint. Screens blossomed, jittered, began to swallow and return the moment in 1,000 thin mirrors. Names hatched at once. Wookey Wave. Real Witch. Water Listens. Text pulsed through the crowd like fish flashing silver in a shoal. The presenter found his camera again and tried to put his mouth back on the story. The camera blinked at him as if unimpressed. "Stop," Avis said. Not a command to the phones, only a suggestion to the people holding them. Enough obeyed to make a quiet Worth standing inside. Even those who kept filming lowered their arms a fraction, as if discovering that attendance required more than capture. Elen waded to the chalk line with her head torch off, so the light would not make demands. She had the little glass vial in her hand, stoppered, the label gone soft with wet. She did not cross the hedge. She set the vial on the stone between the double V's, as if returning a relic to its shrine. "You said sanctity thins," she told the rock and the woman in the same breath. "Then let the witness thicken. On the record, on paper, in sound, on film that isn't a circus. Not about you. With you. I'll make the room. You decide what enters it." Avesi stepped forward until her toes kissed chalk. The line shivered, held, then warmed, as if saying this boundary knows who it is for. She picked up the vial. "Once," she said to the ring of faces and the river and the watching stone, "a man carried water toward me as if it were a weapon only he could wield. He believed he loved order more than he feared me. The story they wrote made a statue of that moment and fed it to children." She worked the stopper free with a nail. The small pop was domestic again, absurd and holy at once. She lifted the glass. The present pressed in to see, police and parents, crew and tourists, a Barnard actor suddenly and beautifully unnecessary. Even the drones, grounded and sulking, seemed to listen with their blind red eyes. "This is not a weapon," Avis said. "This is a river. It remembers more names than any of us." She drank. The axe in the vial met the axe at her ankles and agreed about her. It did not scorch or climb her bones like rope. It ran cool through old knots and loosened them a notch. The taste was limestone and leaf rot and metal, and under it, steady as bell note, the flavour of something that had survived misnaming. Her shoulders lowered by a finger's breadth. She let the glass hang at her side and exhaled. A tremor that had stood for centuries and pretended to be resolve left her wrists. She could feel the room feel it, the way water senses a boat has raised its oar and the ripples change shape. Someone began to clap and, mercifully, stopped after 2 confused beats. Sergeant Ellis cleared her throat. "Right," she said, practical as rope. "If we're done with the part where anyone drowns, we move to the part where people get warm. This area stays quiet." She tipped her chin toward Elen. "Doctor?" Ellen nodded. "Tomorrow," she said for all to hear, and now her voice was a tool that could build. "In the chapter house at Wells, we'll take an oral history. Not a press event, Scholars, stoneworkers, the Wookey custodians, the Environment Agency, the diocese, 2 spare chairs for any local grandmothers who remember the older versions. The hint of humour in that line was careful and kind. We'll document the chalk marks as care, not cages. We'll write the water into the minutes. We'll ask Avis what she wants kept. The presenter lifted his hand, surprisingly polite. And the public? He asked, not entirely able to help himself. They'll want. They can have a transcript, Ellen said, without frost. A museum display after the people who live with this place have had their say. No more breakfast shows with cartoon crones. The velvet woman from the car park had drifted close, salt jar held like a prayer she'd forgotten. "You're not binding her?" she asked, and there was something naked in the question, disappointment and relief braided. "I was never yours to bind," Avis said, not unkindly. She looked at the tour guide, laminates limp in his hands, and the man who had chalked hazard on his checklist because he did not have a column for story. "You will still walk school groups through and point at rocks that look like dogs and witches," she said. "Do it with better verbs." He swallowed. "Yes," he said. "We can... yes." And the startling thing was he meant it. Avis turned to Ellis. "Your people." A tilt of the head toward the constables, wet to the shins, jackets plastered with cave breath, kept their hands for catching, not herding. If they need a sentence to write in their reports that keeps their superiors calm, give them this. Event de-escalated by acknowledgement and environmental management. Ellis's mouth twitched. "That is exactly the sort of sentence my sergeant likes." She touched her radio, thought better of it, and simply said, "Thank you," again, as if practice improved gratitude, which it does. Maya stood on the safer side now, socks steaming, hand in her mother's. She raised her voice just enough to cross the small river of air between them. "What will they call you?" she asked. "On the sign." Avis looked at Elen, at the chalk hedge, at the faces trying their best. She thought of all the mouths that had chewed her down to a warning. "Avis," she said, and the rest of the words should be about what happened to me, not what I did to them. Maya considered and nodded, a small curator already editing a label in her head. The Barnard actor stepped forward, robe dripping, sprinkler inert. "Do I... still?" he began, and trailed off, mortified by his own question. "You can put the robe down," Avisi said, gentler than he deserved. "Keep the patience you practiced to wear it. You'll need that more." He folded the garment over his arm with unexpected care, as if it were a skin he was grateful to be allowed out of. Around the edges, work resumed, not the noisy kind, the useful kind. Cones shifted from theatrics to safety. Barriers were moved to channel people toward tea and dry towels. Someone fetched folding chairs for the elderly. A volunteer in a mascot witch hat took it off and handed it to a child who had been brave. The child, now busy with paper cup and biscuit, ignored it completely. Ellen came to the chalk again. "There's a room in the archives that has bad light and a wonderful table," she said, low enough that only Avis and the rock could hear. "It's where we put voices that matter. I'll bring a recorder I don't hate and a fountain pen that behaves. You can bring silence or thunder as you like." "And after?" Avis asked. "After," Ellen said. "We ask for what needs asking. Dark nights for the cave, clean water for the axe, fewer cartoons." The smile at that last was there and gone. "A plaque we write together." Avisi held the empty vial up so it caught the scant light, a small clear bell. She set it down inside the chalk and touched 2 fingers to the stone in thanks. "Not statue," she said. "Witness." The word landed and stayed. Beyond the floodlights, morning finally committed to itself. Colour crept back into the world in reasonable amounts. The river ran the way good stories do when they are told by people who have finally learned to listen. Not straight, not tame, but true. Avis stepped back from the chalk and into the cave's shadow, not to hide, but because home has its own gravity. Over her shoulder to Elen, "Bring your vessels." Ellen nodded. "Bring your weather," she answered. Between them, the old legend cracked along a seam and opened, less like a break, more like an egg. Inside was room enough for both a witch and a river to go on being themselves, and for the telling to grow up at last. They met the next morning in a room that knew how to keep voices. The chapter house breathed cool as a cellar. Its ribs gathered the sound and sent it back kinder. Elen had made a low semicircle of chairs, 2 for grandmothers who arrived with umbrellas like sceptres. 1 for Sergeant Ellis, who sat straight-backed and damp-hemmed, 3 for the cave custodians with their careful hands. A hydrologist came in late with maps rolled like pastries under her arm. The Barnard actor slipped in last and left the robe in a bag by the door as if it might bite. Ellen set a recorder on the table and a fountain pen that behaved. "This is Avis's account," she said, and the words steadied the room as surely as chalk steadies a floor. "We're not tidying. We are listening." Avis told it plain. Not the soft soap tale that fits on a leaflet, not the breakfast laughter. The willow and the promise, the monk who loved order, the cold rope of water, the centuries of being used to teach children to behave. She spoke of waking and of the iron wasp and of the chalk hedge that knew the difference between binding and care. The recorder's red eye shone, patient. When Ellen asked, "What keeps you safe?" Avis named them, 3 dark nights each month when the cave would go lampless from dusk to dawn, a promise that the axe would be measured and minded like a heart, the chalk to remain where it was until stone itself learned its outline. No breakfast shows, no cartoon teeth. "Children may touch the rock," she added, "if they have been told my name first." "And what do you give back?" one of the grandmothers asked, eyebrows high as hedges. Avis smiled with her mouth and rare as weather clearing with her eyes. "Sentinel," she said. "Witness. On storm nights I walk to fetch what words can't carry. The rest of the time I keep still where people can find me and test their manners on the truth." It wasn't a contract. It was better, a set of terms everyone could remember without folding paper. They wrote the plaque together after tea. Ellen sketched, a stonemason from the cathedral yard. Tom, forearms powdered with old churches, set his chisel like a blessing and asked, without theatricality, "Serifs or no?" "No." Avis said, "Let the letters be clean. Let them stand because they are true, not because they dress like truth." The first strike sent dust into the morning sun. The grandmothers nodded with the proprietary satisfaction of women who had watched men do careful work and allowed it to be good. Ellen read the line aloud while Tom made it visible. Avis, of the axe not crone, not monster, turned to stone by a story, walked back out of it. Sentinel. Witness. Treat the cave with care. Keep the river clean. Some nights she walks. They carried the slab between them that afternoon, 4 pairs of hands with different reasons for steadying it. In the cave, the air took the chisel dust and turned it damp, the letters darkened as if ink had learned to be stone. They fixed it where children stop anyway, at the bend where the river speaks most clearly, and the stalagmite they had once called a witch lifts its shoulder from the floor. The electric hornets stayed in their nests. Torches were used briefly, and only to honour dark, not to break it. Maya came with her mother, and stood grave as a small curator while the last bolt tightened. "Can I?" she asked, and Elen nodded. Maya put her palm to the plaque and read it with her hand. When she reached "Some nights she walks," she glanced into the shadow where Avisi stood, not hidden, not on display. Avisi dipped her head, conspirator and guardian. On the far side, Sergeant Ellis touched the double V in the chalk and then stepped back, the way one does by habit when a line is doing its job. "What shape will you keep?" Ellen asked quietly. Avis looked at the old stalagmite, the profile that had eaten centuries of pointing, and at the water's shoulder rounding the dark. She raised a hand and the cave listened. A fresh skin of calcite began to knit along her forearm, soft as milk. "Neither woman nor lump," she said. "Enough of me for children to learn I am not a joke. Enough of stone to remember I belong to this mouth." The rock answered her weight, the way a well-behaved chair answers a tired back. She sat, new posture, old patience, one hand trailing above the axe so a child could touch warm stone and cold water and know both were true. A slow heat gathered in the calcite as if the cave had learned a new trick, to keep a pulse. Tom stepped away with the craftsman's instinct to let a thing be itself once it knows how. Ellen placed a small brass stand for leaflets, not the old cartoon, but a single page with the plaque's words and a line. Ask the guide for Avisi's longer telling. Outside, day tidied the wreckage the flood had unmade. Cones returned to ordinary. Vans went home. The Barnard actor accepted a mop and learned there was useful work that kept your hands wet and your pride intact. The hydrologist waded to a culvert with a probe and said, delighted, "So that's where you went. as if the river had played a good joke 40 years in the telling. At closing time, the cave exhaled the last of the tourists in a mild, satisfied sigh. The custodians clicked lights off in order, leaving darkness to stand where it belonged. The river's voice deepened a little, home after a day of being listened to. Ellen lingered with her palm on the plaque, as if to add body heat to the sentence she had promised to keep. "Do you want the door locked?" she asked. "Yes," Avi said, "and no." Her smile folded 2 centuries into one gesture. Lock the wood, leave the water. Ellen laughed under her breath, turned the key, and left the river as requested. When the first storm after the agreement came, it announced itself with a line of blue beyond the Mendips and a pressure change that made dogs thoughtful. The 3 dark nights had begun. The cave lay lampless, its own lantern. Rain wrote itself over the hills. Down in the kitchen, the chalk hedge glowed just enough to say, "I am here if you need me." Avis stood. The stone let her go the way a good chair lets a body rise. No stick, no sulk. She walked to the mouth where the axe widened and set her hands to the weather. Not to command, not to perform, to remind. The culverts woke like old friends tapped at a window. The black river of road behaved. Somewhere upstream, a child who had touched warm stones slept without nightmares about witches and learned a different fear. The useful kind, the one that teaches you where to put your feet. In the morning, 2 small prints showed on the damp path by the plaque, next to the place where visitors kneeled to read. Maya's. She had come early before school, palm pressed to the line sentinel. Witness. Just to make sure the letters still held. They did. The legend did too, but it had cracked in the right place. Now, when guides stopped school groups in the half-dark, they said her name first, and the children reached out, and the stone, warm as a kept promise, answered back. On some nights, when rain and bells agreed, the witch of Wookey Hole walked, not to frighten, to remember, and to be remembered in turn.
This was The Witch of Wookey Hole, written by Barrel Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Barrel Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.